Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Gabriela Renteria, and I'm the former chair of Evolve Youth Global Network and a long-time supporter of young and emerging evaluators. It is a pleasure to serve you as your moderator today. I am delighted to welcome you to the 8th Future of Evaluation Dialogue, part of a monthly series that invites us to reflect and explore the transformative power of evaluation in shaping a more just and sustainable future. Every month, the dialogues are held in connection with an important date. Today's dialogue is in observance of International Women's Day on March 8th. In this dialogue, we'll explore how evaluation can move beyond measurement to actively accelerate rights, justice, and transformative action for all women and girls in an increasingly complex and unequal world. Our question today is, how can evaluation accelerate rights, justice, and action for all women and girls? This is an invitation not only for our panelists, but for everyone to reflect and share. Evaluation has helped us measure progress. We have counted beneficiaries, tracked the progress of indicators. Yet, across regions and contexts, women and girls continue to face systemic discrimination, violence, unequal access to resources, and exclusion from decision-making. This reality invites us to ask a very difficult question. We have long lived by the motto, what can we measure can be improved. Yet, if progress is being measured, why do inequalities persist? Perhaps the challenge is not only on what we evaluate, but for how, for whom, and with whom we evaluate. In a world marked by polycrises like climate change, economic instability, conflict, and technological disruption, inequalities deepen and multiply. Women and girls experience this crisis differently and disproportionately because they are positioned within unequal systems of power. Within this introduction and understanding of evaluation as a tool to confront power and eliminate systemic inequalities, we now turn to our panelists, who will bring these ideas to life through their diverse experiences and perspectives. You can join us in this conversation. Please, you can introduce and use the chat function to introduce yourself. And also, if English is not your first language, Zoom offers a closed caption feature. You can use it for ease. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We have Erica Martelone, who's a senior leader in international development with over 20 years of experience advancing organizational effectiveness and evidence-informed change. As Chief of Institutional Effectiveness at UNICEF Evaluation Office, she leads global evaluations that translate evidence into action to protect children's rights and expand opportunities for women and girls worldwide. We also have Arushi Dubey, who's an evaluation consultant with the Independent Evaluation Service and has been with the organization for over 5 years. She works at the intersection of gender justice, evidence, and action, leading feminist rights-based evaluations and translating complex findings into decisions that matter for women and girls, especially in crisis and politically constrained contexts. Arushi is working at UN Women. We also have Stefan Paulsen, who is a monitoring and evaluation practitioner working across complex multi-stakeholder environments in South Africa and the SADC region. With a strong foundation in program coordination and evaluation systemic strengthening, he represents a new generation of evaluators committed to practical evidence use, institutional accountability, and meaningful social development impact. And last but not least, we also have Oyuna Chulundo, who's a medical doctor and a public health professional by training, with more than 20 years of experience in managing and evaluating development programs in conducting public health research. Oyuna currently works for United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, as a regional planning, monitoring, and evaluation officer for the Asia and the Pacific region. So let's move to the heart of today's discussion. Our panelists bring very diverse perspectives and lived experiences, and they will help us explore our central question. How can evaluation accelerate progress towards gender equality in a rapidly changing world? I'd like to ask our audience that as you listen, please reflect on these connections between evidence, power, and action, and share with us and consider how evaluation can help drive a more just and inclusive world. So let's begin. Erica, would you like to share with us how can evaluation accelerate progress toward gender equality in a rapidly changing world? Over to you.
Thank you, Gabriela. You're asking a very important question, especially in the world we are living in today. My experience at UNICEF is that evaluation accelerates progress toward gender equality when it moves beyond accountability alone and becomes a driver of learning, voice, and action. So let me share 5 levers that we can use to make this happen. First, I would say evaluation makes inequalities visible. Many of the barriers facing women and girls, such as social norms, unpaid care burdens, digital exclusion, or technologically facilitated gender-based violence, remain hidden in aggregated data. Gender responsive and intersectional evaluation help us understand who is being left behind, why, and under what power structures. This evidence is essential for designing policies, strategies, programs that actually transform systems, not just, as you said, improve averages. Second, evaluation can shift power by centering women's and girls' voices. At UNICEF, for example, we use participatory and child and adolescent responsive evaluation approaches that allow girls and young women to define what success looks like in their own lives. When evaluation includes lived experience, not only institutional perspectives, findings gain legitimacy and relevance, and programs become more responsive and equitable. Third, evaluation accelerates changes when it's timely and used in decision making, not produced too late. In faster changing contexts where we see digital advancement, it's important for evaluation to become more real time and adaptive, so that we can really help course correction to happen quickly and scale what works for gender equality. Fourth, I will say evaluation strengthens accountability for gender commitments. Evidence can help governments and partners track whether gender policies translate into real outcomes for girls and women, especially the most marginalized, and support advocacy grounded in credible evidence. Lastly, I will add that evaluation contributes most when it's transformative rather than transactional, when it challenges assumptions, informs action, and builds shared ownership of evidence among stakeholders. So if we really want evaluation to accelerate gender equality, I think we must treat evaluation not as the end of a program cycle, but as a continuous process that amplifies voices, inform choices, and support collective action toward rights and justice for every woman and every girl. Thank you. And back to you, Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Erica. These are very powerful ideas that you left us with. Now, I would like to ask Arushi. Arushi, do you want to share with us how can evaluation accelerate powers towards gender equality in a rapidly changing world? Over to you.
Thank you, Gabby, and wishing everyone here a very belated Happy International Women's Day. Thanks also to Erica. I really appreciated your point about evaluation making inequalities visible. I think all of us here are aware that gender equality is currently facing a moment of backlash and of tightening resources. And in my experience working with evaluations at UN Women, evaluation does have that really practical role that Erica was also alluding to, really helping ensure that efforts lead to better outcomes for women and girls. So just simply put, that's what it is. And what we consistently see across many evaluations is that Transformative change often happens through locally rooted initiatives and also through grassroots actors. So, particularly those that are working with women and those that are working with women who are the most marginalized. I think evaluation really helps bring those lessons learned forward by showing clearly what works, for whom, and under what conditions, and by ensuring that that evidence informs the decisions upwards. At the same time, and I would be, remiss to mention that gender equality landscape is rapidly evolving. So evaluations must also respond to those emerging challenges from technology facilitated gender-based violence, TFGBV, what Erica was also mentioning, to the proliferation of crisis contexts, gender impacts of climate change, and of course the shrinking civic space that we hear of almost on a daily basis. Within the UN system, the UN 2.0 agenda and what we're calling sort of the quintets of change also emphasize stronger capabilities in areas such as data, as innovation, foresight, and partnerships. And what is the role of evaluation in these quintets of change is really being central to that shift because it does help generate the evidence that's needed to guide these transformations. But ultimately, evaluation must always return to a very simple question. What does this mean for women on the ground, especially those that are most left behind? When women and girls are not only subjects of evaluations, but also actively participate in shaping, what is evaluated and how, that's when the evidence really becomes more relevant and more credible and much more likely to drive real change. So I'll stop with that, Erica, and Gabriel. Thank you so much, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Arushi, for sharing your points of view. Now, I would like to ask Stefan. Stefan, do you want to share with us how can evaluation accelerate progress towards gender equality in a rapidly changing world? Over to you.
Thank you, Gabriela. And thank you for the question as well. I think I want to focus a bit more specifically on evaluation and particularly from perspective of commissioners of evaluation. I know that in evaluation there is often mainstream area focus on gender equality and women empowerment. I believe that to really advance and accelerate progress towards gender equality, GWE or gender equity and women empowerment should also be a standalone area where it's looked at a bit more in depth, and also as Erika mentioned, looking at intersectionality. I think sometimes the issue of GWE often get lost in big reports and it's not always forthcoming or focal as a primary area. For example, women with disabilities, looking at different age groups, race, class, customs, beliefs, traditions, etc. Because inequality doesn't always exist between households, it also exists within households. So we should really look a bit more in depth beyond just looking at the data for prescriptive measures or prescribing quick solutions or quick fixes, but to actually looking at it descriptively, zooming a bit more on it, at lived experiences. And I'm also just, as I was writing this, I was also thinking about drawing on the social science of anthropology. I find it quite interesting, especially looking at how ethnographic studies are conducted, going into the field, really living in the setting, really spending time in the communities, and not often as evaluators parachuting into communities. And although we are on the ground and we do get that appreciation, often it is lost in translation when we're writing reports and having to submit those reports. So I'll just park there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And last but not least, I would like Oyuna. Oyuna, can you share a little bit with us and just to remind everyone the question, how can evaluation accelerate progress towards gender equality in a rapidly changing world? You can also leave us your perspectives on the chat. Oyuna, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gabby. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. I have 3 points to share, complementary to what my fellow panelists already shared. First of all, for millions of women and girls, justice begins with care and protection. So access to those life-saving care and protection is the right. And the evaluation serves as a crucial, evidence base to identify exactly where those gaps exist. And it can expose, where care is unavailable, or if it's available poor in quality, or failing to follow client-centered approaches. So that way, this evidence can help to improve women's and girls' access to care and protection and exercise their rights. And the second point is similar to what Eric and other colleagues mentioned. Evaluations provide evidence where national laws and policies and plans are restrictive and undermine rights, choices, and opportunities in decision-making by women and girls. In some contexts, we know that women and girls must obtain third-party consent to access care or other opportunities. Or even if the laws and policies guarantee equal rights and protection, implementation is often a major challenge. It could be many different reasons. Limited capacity of financing to implement bureaucratic systems. It could be poor accountability mechanisms or weak enforcement of laws and policies. And we often also see persistent discriminatory gender and social norms that the panelists already spoke about. So evaluations provide crucial evidence where such structural barriers limit exercise of rights and choices and opportunities for women and girls, and where improvements are needed and must be made. And third point, I would like to highlight that in humanitarian settings, these inequalities and vulnerabilities are magnified, and women and girls at their greatest risk, and they face many challenges. So evaluations in humanitarian context are essential to ensure the rights of the furthest behind are protected in crisis context and should not be deprioritized. So just to sum up these 3 points, evaluations provide crucial evidence to support learning and decision-making, as my colleagues already mentioned, to invest our limited resources where it can make the most difference in terms of changes, positive changes in the lives of women and girls, to address structural barriers and root causes to injustice, to make course corrections, and to be accountable, first and foremost, to women and girls we serve. I'll stop here. Back to you, Gabby. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irina, and thank you all. What a great start to this dialogue. Each of you brought such thought-provoking perspectives to the table. I would like to maybe some messages that were very powerful to me were basically we should go beyond on what success looked like to what success looked like for the people we're working with, right? To involve their perspectives. That also evaluation needs to be not an end, but rather a transformative tool to evidence and fill up those gaps. Not like, to me, something that was super powerful was as well, let's look beyond the average. This is not just to increase the average, but what works for whom. And I really love the perspective of locally rooted initiatives, actually hearing the people who are participating in the interventions, who the evaluations are affecting them. I really like that the evaluation is this tool to fill up the gaps, to bring different perspectives to evaluation, to actually measure what success looks like for the people, not just for evaluators. So now let's shift the energy a little bit. This is a dialogue, and as such, we want all of you to participate. To our friends in Zoom, in LinkedIn, we invite you to participate with us. We see people from Indonesia, from Ethiopia, from South Africa, from Uganda, from Paris, from Brazil. So we want that this live dialogue with all of you. As such, we are going to launch a quick poll with a bold statement, something that challenges to our assumptions and push your thinking. We have our bold statement that is, if evaluation cannot expose power, confront injustice, and drive action for women and girls, then it's not part of the solution. It is part of the problem. You will have 3 options to choose from: agree, disagree, and nuanced view. You may go ahead and vote now, and let's see where this room stands. In the meantime, we also invite those who are watching us on live on LinkedIn to share their answers by commenting in the chat. So we're having some of the questions. Thank you. Thank you so much. If you are voting for nuanced views, you can also put it in the chat. So let's see. Please, people, let's get those numbers going. Our evaluators, we like to, one of the things that we like is to measure. So let's just go with the poll. But also we want to share your points of view. So you can also share it in the chat. So we have great results so far. Thank you so much. All right, the results are coming in. Let's look at the results. I don't know if you see it, but we have, wow, 80% of the people agree, 3% disagree, and 70% have nuanced view. I would like to hear, like to know what are those perspectives. So like, thank you all for voting. Thank you. And if you want to share all of that 3% with who disagreed and the people who have a nuanced view, you can share with us via chat. And let's get back to those. Thank you all for your participation. Now let's take this same question to our panelists. Dear panelists, tell us, where do you stand on this? You're welcome to agree, disagree, or share the nuanced take, and feel free to respond to each other as well if you're developing on your fellow panelists. Over to you, Arushi.
Thanks, Gabby. I do agree with the spirit of this statement. There's no doubt that evaluation should help, expose inequalities and drive action for women and girls. But I guess I also agree with, participants who took a slightly nuanced view, in the sense that as evaluators, we can't really enforce change. We can't guarantee that recommendations will be implemented, but we do carry that responsibility, for how evidence is produced and how it's communicated, and then somewhat on also how it's used. For evaluations to really be, future fit, it must be going beyond just documenting results. It really needs to surface, what we've discussed so far, intersectional realities, but also looking into, and this comes, into play, especially when we're examining gender issues, more structural power dynamics and social norms that shape these inequalities. I also think it's equally important to close that entire sort of feedback loop. Evidence shouldn't only travel upward to decision makers, it should return to the communities whose experiences shaped this evidence. When evaluation does this well, it becomes part of the solution. So that's all from me. Back to you, Gabriela.
Thank you so much, Harushi. So it's not a letter of hey evaluation, then but you're a transformative, you have this transformative power, but also that we as evaluators need to do something like to fulfill some quality, right? Thanks so much, Harushi. Stefan, I would like to hear your thoughts on our poll statement.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you so much. I think I'm part of that 17% that mentioned they're a bit nuanced. I think my view is that yes, evaluation does have a role to play, but if it's done intentionally based on the principles of addressing injustices and power dynamics. I think the reality is that evaluations are commissioned and are often very rigid in structure, meaning that they follow a set template format and they need to really be addressed based on those core guidelines. So one can't really look outside of that if it's really commissioned. And I guess grassroots organizations don't always have the budget to conduct their own evaluation. So it's always up to the donors or the funders to really commission evaluations and move that needle a bit forward. And then evaluations also have various stakeholders and vested interests that often limits the scope to do in-depth investigation into root causes. So again, linking back to it being very rigid, I think that's also part of the problem or issue of actually addressing underlying and root causes. But it's also there for a purpose and has to operate within a scope and a budget. But the issue with that is that it often leaves soft systems intact, meaning that those micro power dynamics and all those intersectionalities often is left unspoken or left not addressed or really thoroughly examined, which just leaves the system perpetually intact and not really looking at the deeper root causes. I think it's also partly due to how evaluations are fundamentally designed. In most instances, it's a needs-based approach, so looking at immediate causes of the problem. I think there should be a shift to look at it more from a humanitarian perspective, looking at focusing on structural causes and manifestations of it. So I think my underlying message is that we're not really looking deep enough and answering those difficult questions. I think often due to time constraints, capacity, and all these various factors, it does make it difficult. So in summary, evaluation is not necessarily itself the problem, but the various needs of the actors and environmental issues is issues that needs to address is really the main crux of it, because it has to please a lot of people, and it has to answer different questions at the same time. So I'll just park there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Now I'd like to ask Oyuna. Oyuna, just to remind everyone, our bold statement is if evaluation cannot expose power, confront injustice, and drive action for women and girls, then it's not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. Oyuna, I would like to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Gabby. I'll also go with the nuanced view, and I'll explain why. In the UN, gender equality and women's empowerment is guiding principle in our programming and every work we do, including in evaluations. So there is this very concerted effort and intention to integrate gender equality and women's empowerment in every phase of the evaluation to really uncover those power dynamics and structural barriers that continue to limit the rights and choices for women and girls. But there are also limitations, and despite all of these efforts, we sometimes see, the opportunity may not have been fully utilized. And I'll give 4 examples. Sometimes evaluations rely a lot on quantitative secondary data, which may not be, disaggregated and may not provide enough details whether the single number can provide information, sufficient evidence to expose inequalities and injustices. And then evaluations also often describe what happened, but they fail to analyze why it happened in relation to gender equality, power dynamics, and root causes. Such gender-blind findings might state that, the services, for example, are improved, the status of women and girls haven't been improving, but without investigating if the most marginalized women and girls were still excluded due to different factors, including social norms or power dynamics within the households or in communities, and other causes as well. And then third common limitation is weak methodology and stakeholder mapping. If the evaluations do not have explicit evaluation questions to uncover such power dynamics and structural causes, and less meaningful engagement of women and girls in evaluations and do not use participatory approaches, or sometimes they are blind to intersectionality lens. So in such cases, the evaluations do not really provide that crucial evidence to really understand the causes. And then sometimes evaluation reports identify gender inequalities, injustices in the findings, but they fail to translate them into gender transformative recommendations. So to address above challenges, evaluations use participatory mixed method approaches, and yet women and girls still too often participate in evaluations as data sources or key informants rather than strategic partners. And by limiting their roles to key informants, we miss vital opportunities for empowerment. And I was really pleased to hear other panelists talking about, how such participatory approaches can really bring in the voices of women and girls into the evaluations. So we need to really integrate their voices into leadership roles to better define and solve the challenges women and girls face, including in reference groups, in steering committees, co-designing and conducting evaluations. I'll stop here. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Oyuna. Erica, I would like to ask you to share your point of view on this bold statement. If evaluation cannot expose power, confront injustice, and drive action for women and girls, then it's not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. What do you think, Erica? Over to you.
Thank you. And indeed, what a provocative statement here. I have to say that as any good evaluator, I have a yes and a but. So I agree with our attendees that evaluation must confront power and injustice. Otherwise, of course, evaluation risk just reinforcing the status quo. But, and here is the nuance I want to bring. Evaluation needs to be truly part of the solution, and to be truly part of the solution, we need to rethink how we practice evaluation. So for me, future fit evaluation means going beyond measuring results, as also some other panelists say, and really trying to understand who benefits, who is excluded, and why. And this means really recentering evaluation practice around the women's and girls' voices, but also generating evidence fast enough to inform decisions. We're living, in a world that is dominated by social media, and we need to accelerate how we carry out evaluations and inform decision makers. And lastly, we really need to focus on use, ensuring findings are actually utilized to drive accountability and change. And this means, working with decision makers throughout the evaluation process, from the design of an evaluation to the finalization of an evaluation process, including accompanying the management response process, because it's only working with decision makers that allow us really to influence them and to make sure that evaluation evidence is timely and relevant to the needs of those that can actually change policies, strategies, and programs. So for me, evaluation really accelerates gender equality when it becomes a tool for learning, bringing in the voices of women and girls, but also for action, really working with those that can change things to improve policies, strategies, and program. So not just a reporting tool, but really a tool that can help strengthening systems, adapting them, and ultimately, deliver better outcomes for the most marginalized girls and women.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you all. Great reflection. Thank you for your honesty and insight in this discussion. I hope that we can reflect on this with the audience. Thank you, Sabina and Ian, who shared their insights, that it really depends on the design of the evaluation, on the role of participatory of the evaluation, whether it's participatory. Then also Ian, who mentioned that the realities that limit the scope and the depth of evaluation. So we need to reinforce the dialogue with evaluation funders, commissioners, so it's not that rigid. So I invite all of you to share your comments on the chat, or we have a box with Q&A, so you can also ask questions there. To me, it was very interesting to hear that actually evaluation must be intentional and not just a checking box exercise, but like actually identifying who's left behind, like to have this question of transformative and saying like, to have this intentional and being explicit about these power dynamics. And I will add that maybe reflect on our own position within the evaluation, to reflect on that, where we're standing, getting to know the context. where are we standing into the system of the evaluation to actually make it usable and that evaluation can drive to action. Now, I will ask our panelists some deeper questions based on today's themes and reflections. So now let's start with Stefan. Stefan, where is evaluation currently falling short in advancing women and girls' rights, and what must fundamentally change for evaluation to move from documenting inequalities to actively dismantling them? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby. And I think that's quite an important question. I have 4 points. I'll be quite concise on them. I think number one, using evaluation to actually, or evaluation findings to build gender competency or training or workshops around those findings. I feel oftentimes evaluation reports gather dust and they're not really utilized to the fullest potential that they should. I think there's a lot of value in actually incorporating it into um, or designing at least trainings and workshops around those key elements to make it a bit more or at least to build more competency around being gender sensitive. And then also participatory and inclusive approach. So being intentional about including women from marginalized groups. I think that's an underlying kind of theme throughout the conversation about being intentional and being inclusive. And then advocacy orientated. I think this also links to my earlier comment about building trainings and workshops. Yeah, just being a bit more intentional about actually using the results and findings and in those spaces and places to advocate around it and not necessarily um, to have an evaluation just as a report sitting somewhere, but using as a source of evidence to actually push the agenda forward and make the design a bit more inclusive at the end of the day for future evaluations. And then I think a last area is accountability. I think accountability is often very top-down approach, and it's very rare that people from that have marginalized voices often get to hold those in power accountable for results and findings. And I think it also leads to the question is who is responsible for change and at what level of that change. So yeah, I think that's a quite an important area, especially around power dynamics. And it also links to that soft systems where it's unspoken and not often addressed. Yeah. Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for those great insights. Now, I would like to ask Erica. Erica, in context of rapid social, technological, and climate change, how can evaluation produce timely, gender-responsive evidence that actually influence decisions without sacrificing depth, rigor, or accountability?
Thank you, Gabriela. That's another great question. And because many of our evaluation systems were designed for a slower world, and the reality now is that social, technological, and climate changes are happening in real time. We need to address this tension, right? And I don't see this as a choice between timeliness and rigor. For me, the real shift is in moving from evaluation as a one-time exercise to evaluation as a continuous learning process to inform action. So if decisions are happening quickly, evidence also needs to be generated continuously, but in ways that, of course, remain systematic and transparent. So let me give you an example. At UNICEF, we work in over 190 countries around the world, very often in context affected by climate change. And what we see is that, for example, when households face shocks, I was in Madagascar, a few years ago, and we were repeatedly affected by typhoons. And when these events happen, girls are the first to lose access to education or protection services. So if we only evaluate at the end of a program, we learn too late, right? What works and how and for whom and why. But when programs use rapid evaluation approaches and put in place rapid feedback loops, regular conversation with adolescent girls, community feedback mechanism, and create short learning cycles, our teams can really spot those gendered impacts early and then adapt programs. So maybe then, programs are adjusted, safe spaces for girls are strengthened, or outreach changes before girls drop out entirely from school are put in place. So the rigor comes from triangulating evidence across multiple sources and also being clear about what we know and what we are still learning, not simply from taking more time to produce an evaluation or waiting until a program is concluded. Another important idea for me is also considering whose knowledge counts. Gender responsive evidence becomes more timely and more relevant when women and girls really help interpret findings, not just provide data. As some of our panelists mentioned before, it's very important for us also to incorporate in our evaluation approaches that include women and girls, not just in data collection, but also in discussing the findings and recommendations of an evaluation. And this is also key to make sure we give back what we find in an evaluation and really elevate the voices of women and girls. And these days also with technology, we can be much faster in collecting data using digital data collection tools and also real-time monitoring tools. And when we do so, it's also important that we don't exclude those without access and be aware also of the risk that are involved in using those tools. So for me, it's really about balance, balancing the need for generating evidence on time with rigor, and also making sure that when we do so, we also include and reflect in our evaluations live realities and do so in a way that is rigorous so that our evidence can be trusted. And this is important because evaluation has an impact not only when it arrives perfectly at the end, but also when it helps decision makers to act earlier and move fairly for every woman and every girl.
Thank you so much, Erica. We have very interesting comments in the chat as well. I like we can push decision makers toward the broader transformational approach. We can convince them that their programs will fail if we don't address their root causes that like we were mentioning before. Thank you, Ian, as well for sharing. We have some questions. We'll be taking them in the next section of this dialogue. Now, I would like to invite Arushi. Arushi, I have a particular question for you. How can evaluation meaningfully shift power toward women, girls, and gender diverse communities, especially those most marginalized, so that their lived experiences shape what is evaluated, how it's evaluated, and how findings are used?
Great. Thanks for the question, Gabby. And I have a lot to say on this topic, so I'm going to speak rather quickly. But I do, implore all the participants to, ask any questions or follow up on the chat, and I'd be happy to answer anything. Just picking up on something I mentioned earlier and perhaps adding, a small sort of evaluator's reflex. Shifting power through evaluation really starts with a simple question: who actually shapes the evaluation process, right? And too often, evaluations are designed far away from the communities whose lives they aim to understand. We talk about, a feminist approach and a participatory approach. And when we talk about these topics, we want to ensure that it's not just women and girls, but also gender diverse communities. There are, as Erica was mentioning, not just respondents, but also active contributors to the evaluation process. So this means involving them in defining the questions, interpreting the findings, and validating the conclusions. Oyuna already highlighted that participation is essential, so I don't want to repeat that point, but I cannot, emphasize enough how important it is to move beyond participatory evaluation as a concept and actually embedded in practice. Just to give you a quick example, at UN Women more recently, or actually end of last year, we have been experimenting with this approach through a feminist collaborative evaluation that we did on social norms, where we, the evaluators, worked closely with the program teams, with the civil society actors, with the gender equality activists of each of our case study countries, and experts from Global South to co-create those knowledge products, generate insights that feed directly into the program development. So this was done, as I was mentioning, across 5 regions globally and across 9 countries. I will say, the caveat that was the evaluation was a very long process, but we did try to ensure that it was kind of feeding into UN Women's strategies real time, as and when the evidence was sort of emerging. So still having that sort of accountability factor in mind while keeping the evaluation participatory and feminist. I saw a question, interestingly, in the Q&A, and I just want to take the opportunity to also answer this simultaneously. So the question was from Gana Oja, who was asking us, how can evaluation sort of better analyze class and power relations? And that's what we are referring to when we speak about a feminist approach. It's not just about evaluating gender issues or having gender questions, or including that one question in the HRGE section about like mainstreaming gender. It's really about the principles that guide how evaluation is constructed. So recognizing the power dynamics, engaging the communities meaningfully, and creating a space essentially for those whose lives are affected by the programs that we implement to shape the knowledge that is produced. I think it especially matters because traditional monitoring and evaluation systems often miss the experiences of marginalized individuals, including women, and participatory evaluations really help to reflect the lived realities. Finally, and you may think that this is exactly something that someone from UN Women would say, and you'd be partly right, but this is actually really relevant for anyone working in evaluation. I do want to emphasize this point really strongly, that gender equality should not be treated as a niche issue that's relevant only to organizations with a gender mandate. Whether we're evaluating climate programs, digital transformation, governance reforms, economic initiatives, gender dynamics influence outcomes, and ignoring these differences really risks overlooking the needs and experiences of a huge section of the world's population. Ultimately, evaluation shifts power when it centers lived experiences and ensures those voices really shape those decisions. And I think that when that happens, evaluations move beyond measurement and really become a tool for accountability and transformation. With that, I'll stop and I'll pass back to you, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Harushi. I hope that at some point, this is not only what people from UN Women said, but more and more evaluators worldwide. Oyuna, I would like to ask you a question as well. What concrete actions can evaluators and commissioners take to ensure evaluation evidence translate into timely policy change, financing, and action for gender equality, going beyond symbolic commitments? Oyuna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gabby. Very important question, but also very difficult question. And I'm sure other colleagues may also come in, and maybe participants can share their thoughts as well on this question. So I have 4 actions in mind based on the evaluations and how they influenced the programming and decisions and actions based on the recommendations of these evaluations in UNFPA. First of all, one of the panelists also mentioned that co-ownership of evaluations by decision makers is so important, by the governments, non-government institutions, donors, or whoever are making decisions based on the recommendations. When the government or other stakeholders co-own the evaluation questions and have a vested interest, they are far more likely to own the answers. I think this is a very important point to always, have this engage the decision makers from the early stages of the evaluation. And the second point I'd like to make is we provide support, technical support, and we do advocacy efforts in countries in terms of policy development and implementation. But we do not always advocate and support credible, good quality policy evaluations to understand how well those policies work and if they really made a difference in lives of people, especially of women and girls, and address their needs. So I think we need to advocate for and support governments in conducting policy evaluations and address policy gaps, especially in the context where national evaluation systems are still developing and they may require some support from organizations who are commissioning evaluations. And then evaluation recommendations often require investments and financing of certain policy areas or programs. And we see that a lot in our UNFPA evaluations. And but that requires also understanding of government budget processes involving key stakeholders in evaluations. And it's not only sectoral ministries, but also planning, finance ministries, because this gives an opportunity to leverage the interest and also ownership of budgetary decision making later on. But they also need evidence that speaks their language, which is the budget language, right? And often evaluations do not provide sufficient economic analysis or, value for money analysis that can provide those solutions in terms of investment and financing. So I think this is the question I have, perhaps to the audience, if how we can possibly use the evaluations to provide such evidence for budgetary decision making. And then my last point is, and also other colleagues spoke about it too, evaluation commissioners need to facilitate meaningful engagement of women and girls. It needs to be intentional, as you were saying, Gabby, and not as key informant, but also to ensure evaluations are relevant and provide recommendations and solutions that speak to their needs, and they co-create those solutions while being empowered in the process of being engaged in evaluation. So thank you, Gabby. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Lina, and thank you to our panelists for those reflections. I think I have a lot of comments. I have a lot of questions in mind on how to apply all of these. You already gave us like some very good examples. I would like to encourage our attendees, because this is a dialogue, right? So to our LinkedIn viewers, you can drop the questions in the comments, and we have a few comments on the we have a few questions in the Q&A section. I don't know if any of you would like to mention it live, say it live. You can raise your hands and you can talk to and share with us some of your questions. Please raise your hand if you have a question or a comment, and then we'll ask our production team to bring you to the stage. We have one question from LinkedIn, so I'm gonna read it out loud and then to ask our panelists if they want to reply. How localization and gender parameters are correlated in terms of evaluation? How can it be more revealing? I don't know if anyone wants to answer this question from our LinkedIn friends. how localization and gender parameters are correlated in terms of evaluation and how it can be more revealing. We have more of the question, like how it can be more revealing beyond planning and implementing gender marker activities. Rather, what will evaluation lens look like to highlight needs for change? Does anyone know for panelists? We also have another question. Much evaluation training and discourse is focused on classic technical methods and sophisticated analysis. How can we better prepare evaluators to successfully involve the most marginalized groups? Yeah, any of the panelists who wants to come in live and answer any of these two questions? Any of our attendees who want to raise your hand? And ask any questions to our panel. Yeah.
Gabby, oh, sorry.
Yeah, Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah, my hand isn't up, but if I may proceed, there's the one question about how we can better prepare, evaluate the successfully involve the most marginalized groups. If I can just respond to that question. I think for me, if I'm just speaking from a personal perspective and point of view, I think it's important for evaluators to actually understand the context, and not just necessarily that context in terms of reading about it and understanding the demographics and having all the maps in front of them and then kind of going into the communities and spending a day or two there. But I think we really need to be intentional about where those areas are less represented in terms of having qualified or technical evaluators in the area. How can we actually capacitate evaluators from that region or from those areas that live in the context and understand the needs to actually address issues within that in that region? And I find that particularly in at Samia, for example, I can make a practical example. We have evaluators that are most prominently based in 2 provinces, but we have 9 provinces. And that is often the issue where evaluators have to come from outside of that particular province and actually have to address issues or questions that should and could be addressed by evaluators within that region. So for me, I think my perspective is more so how do we capacitate and how do we find emerging evaluators in the context of my work, so to say, and really give them an opportunity and the training and skills and support to actually do the work without always having to import evaluators from different areas and different regions. And I think for me, it's particularly maybe an area of passion. But I do believe and think that what is really missing is just that human and emotional touch to evaluation. I think a lot of it is often bundled in reports, and those reports are even further summarized into 1 or 2 pages. A lot is lost within that context. So my kind of short answer to that is really looking at the region itself and what capacity exists there and how can capacity really be enhanced in that regard, especially within the framing or perspective of emerging evaluators. Yeah, I'll just park there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And I see Arushi. Do you want to answer one of the questions?
Thank you, Gabby, and thanks for the question, Sabina. I found the question, really interesting. I think, yes, there are definitely challenges in resource poor settings, as you pointed out, particularly when participants may not be literate or comfortable with technology. And of course, traditional evaluation tools like surveys or digital data collection can sometimes really exclude the very people whose experiences we're trying to understand. I think in those contexts, it becomes really important for evaluators to adapt their methods and create spaces where participants feel comfortable And more than that, they feel respected. So, for example, focus group discussions often work really well in my experience because they allow people to share experiences collectively. So they're in a group, they don't feel put on the spot, and they feel encouraged by other peers also speaking in the same discussion. And it helps them to put their own experience in their words rather than going through like written responses. I think also working with national consultants and local, facilitators is really critical. They understand the language, the cultural context, the local dynamics much better and can really help build that trust with the participants. Really specifically, I think one approach that has worked really well for me in the past is outcome harvesting. This is, and I'm sure you might already be aware, it allows communities themselves to describe the changes that they've experienced rather than us asking us, to respond to predefined indicators or predefined like outcomes. Not to say that practical considerations, don't matter. Using interpreters where needed, simplifying questions, ensuring that the process doesn't feel extractive, but feels, like a respectful conversation is really important. Ultimately, the goal is to make, evaluation sort of accessible and inclusive so that people feel comfortable about sharing their experiences and their voices are generally and genuinely reflected in the evidence. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arshi. We have some questions, but to our attendees, you can raise your hand and also you'll come to ask your questions live. Now, Erica, do you want to answer some of our questions today?
Thank you, Gabriela. And yes, I'd like to try to answer the question on localization. Just to say that localization is increasingly important in how we program. And I think also in evaluation, we should be more intentional in using a localization lens, which means emphasizing local actors, emphasizing more local knowledge and leadership. And for me, evaluating through localization lens is really about, asking questions such as are, local women-led organizations engage in design, delivery of a program and monitoring and analyzing, the power structures supporting this, or instead blocking equitable access. So I think it's really important that we increasingly use intentionally localization in our evaluations. And then going back to some of the earlier question around intersectional evaluation, what I like to say is that it's really important to move, beyond gender alone and really examine in our evaluation also how class, ethnicity, disability, age, and other variables do create different experiences of marginalization. And fully agree that, for example, indigenous women in urban areas may face different barriers than indigenous women in remote villages. What has worked for me in conducting evaluations that integrate intersectional lens is carrying out map power relations, so doing social network analysis or stakeholder mapping to understand who holds influence locally and understand also which groups have access to resources, decision-making positions, and also who is excluded. And also, I like one of the questions in the chat about marginalized groups becoming evaluators. I think there are techniques that can help us incorporating marginalized groups. For example, the use of community-led focus groups where community members do take the lead in carrying out focus group discussions or storytelling, or also photo voice may help capture experiences of those at the margins. And I hope we'll, use those techniques more and more moving forward in conducting evaluations.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you for those methodologies that we should be also using in this kind of evaluations. Well, I'm going to give you a word real quickly to answer one of the questions on the chat. And
Thank
to
you.
our panelists, you can also reply on the chat.
Okay, just wanted to share some experience from UNFPA evaluations. So, because we work with young people in our programs, and when we evaluate our programs, we also engage young and emerging evaluators. So they bring in the real voices of young people as an evaluator, being a part of the evaluation team, and we had the experiences of having young evaluator who had a disability from strong SG group. So this was really, important experience to enrich the evaluation, bringing those voices, and they were the ones who were going to the stakeholders, interviewing, young people and community groups. I think this was itself as a very empowering process and really enriched the quality of evaluation. So I really would like to encourage also other organizations to do that. And I also had the same thought in terms of intersectionality lens, as Erica mentioned, stakeholder mapping, understanding who are the key stakeholders, what stakes they have in evaluations. It's so important. So I think that really helps to bring in different perspectives from different voices from the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuna. Thank you to our audience. We'll keep the conversation as well in the chat. It's great to have this audience, participatory audience, and hear more perspectives. Now we're almost at the top of the hour, and we'll do a quick 30 seconds quick comment round with our panelists. Panelists, please share one key takeaway or action point related to our discussion today, something our audience can take forward to shape the future of evaluation and accelerate rights, justice, and action for all women and girls. Yuna, back to you, 30 seconds.
Thank you. So for evaluation commissioners and evaluators, I think we need to continue conducting and improving evaluations that provide evidence on not only on what, but also why injustices and inequalities women and girls experience persist, and how our policies and programs have addressed or can address these, and pay attention to discriminatory laws, weak legal protections, poor accountability of duty barriers, and limited financing and discriminatory, harmful practices in social and gender norms. I think we need to always have those in mind and focus when we conduct evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuna. Now, Stefan, 30 seconds. What's your call for action?
Yeah, my call for action based on my fellow panelists that I've learned from as well is include participants in discussing findings. Gender shouldn't be niche. I found that quite empowering for myself as well. And engaging policymakers and ensure that I have a vested interest. I think that is quite interesting for myself as well. I haven't really framed it in that way. So that's my key takeaways for me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Erica, now back to you.
Thank you. Well, if I could offer one message to evaluators online with us today, would be design evaluations for use, not just for proof. The world is changing, and our role is no longer to assess results at the end, but to help systems learn and adapt in real time. So we need to ask different questions, focus on power, inclusion, who is left behind, and also working alongside women and girls as partners in generating and interpreting evidence. And with that, happy International Women's Day to everyone.
Thank you so much, Erica. Arushi, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I think throughout our discussion, one reflection that really stood out, for me was that It's the powerful, quality of evaluation in making the invisible visible. Good evaluation, really measures results, but great evaluations makes invisible inequalities impossible to ignore. So I do encourage, all of us present here to keep reflecting on these questions, what we've discussed, and to continue the conversation with us on how evaluation can make better insights into these invisible inequalities and making them more visible. Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway from me. Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Arushi. Thank you all panelists. Amazing. Some strong calls for action there, highlighting these different approaches, making the invisible visible, that the evolution is used to include more people. I think that all of this can help to improve the future of evolution and increase its transformative potential. And as we wrap up, I would like to thank you once again to our amazing speakers, to our partners, and to all of you who joined this conversation. The replay will be immediately available on the UNFPA Independent Evaluation Office LinkedIn page. And remember that this is the 8th of a series of Future of Evolution dialogues. So stay tuned for the 9th dialogue next month in observance of World Creativity and Innovation Day on April 21st. You can find the link to the registration posted in the chat. Thank you, Vicky, and also on evilforaction.org. As we leave, I invite all of you to carry this energy back to your work as we continue to shape the future of evolution, making it more inclusive, more innovative, and more influential. Once you leave this webinar, you will see a pop-up very short to this two-question survey with evaluators who would like to evaluate. And your reflections really matter to us. They help us shape these dialogues going forward. So we will be really grateful if you could take a moment to complete it. Until next time, thank you all. Gracias, and see you again.